Connected to the Mother of Mothers is the intended path to reach Mourning and Havoc, where we will find one of the fourth visage's 2 golden eyes. I don't intend to progress through the area right now, considering it's tough as balls, but while I'm here I'll tag the Predu and connect the Gate of Travel that is also down there. I'm not sure I'll ever have use for the Gate of Travel, but even still I can't help but unlock all of them. We'll talk about this more when we get into it properly, but I love the dried up ocean theme with the wrecked ships in the distance. I think it looks awesome and haunting. The other path is going to lead us to a major portion of the Strife and Ruin DLC that I have alluded to, Miriam's Quest. This is a crossover with Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, featuring the protagonist of that game, Miriam. The premise is as you might expect from a crossover. Miriam has been magically transported to the land from her own, and she needs your help getting back. The glass portal that you traveled through to get here is shattered, the shards of the portal scattered across the land. However, Miriam herself cannot cross through these portals to get the shards, so you need to retrieve the shards for her. There are 5 portals scattered across the land and hidden within the existing areas. Mechanically, this is a series of increasingly difficult timed platforming challenges. The inclusion of these challenges is a bit contentious. The platforming in Blasphemous was improved since launch, but there's still enough of a rough edge that the prospect of a series of difficult timed platforming sequences is not really playing to the strengths of the game. I'm not going to show all the rooms, but I'll show the final challenge as I think it represents the best and the worst of the Miriam challenges. I won't defend the Miriam challenges from the perspective of there being too much friction and frustration involved with the precision of platforming required versus how tight the platforming is. What I'll offer is that these challenges are unfair at times and that trying to also be unfair and break the courses is a satisfying puzzle. Anytime you can skip a sequence, find a faster way through a section, or engage with the course in an unintended feeling way, that's fun. From that perspective, the time limit does encourage that and feels integral to the process of finding ways to traverse the course more efficiently. At the same time, the time limit shines a light on the platforming rough edges in Blasphemous. Removing the time limit could rob the courses of the highs of breaking them, but would also alleviate the lows. Then again, so could reducing or removing the spikes and one-hit kill punishments. Ultimately, these challenges are an uncomfortable fit with the game as it stands. The reward for beating the challenges is the Prayer Cantita of the Blue Rose, which generates a glass rose behind Penitente that will shatter and damage enemies in front of him. It's a decent prayer and worth getting once, but the Miriam challenges are not something I usually revisit. One of the most satisfying ways I broke the courses was to simply wait at the top of these bullet hell elevator sections, in this case counting to 20, and then jumping down to completely avoid a segment of tense ducking and weaving. These challenges are where Redento's toe beads really come in handy, and having beads like the Mason's Wheel for faster movement and Piece of Tombstone to reduce fall recovery help break the courses. Outfitting Penitente with beads for a purpose beyond combat is novel within the game and a fun exercise. These courses were also where I stopped holding down the stick to perform the air impulse for lantern jumps and switched to holding the slide button to perform them, as I found that much more reliable to ensure you would keep moving forward as you lantern jumped. And that's all I have to say about these challenges. There's fun to be had, but the frustration involved in beating the courses puts a big damper on things. I'll let the rest of this play out, enjoy my liberal use of Tiento at the end of this course. I'm still here, by the way, just thought I should let this play out before returning to the main game.
Está completo. Ha recuperado todo su poder. Hasta más ver, guerrero.
And now we're back into the Mother of Mothers. Heading up now, we get a section of the platforming encounters in Mother of Mothers. I also seem to have a particular grievance against these candles in particular. We see the new fancy version of the candelabra wielding acolyte here, this time in more ornamental vestment. And we sneak a peek of a new enemy I'll be facing off against in just a moment, the custodian of the stained glass. Their face is covered and they have shards of stained glass protruding from their back. They wield shards like knives, making quick melee strikes that deal decent damage. They are not hardy enemies, so even at mea culpa level 4, a couple parries and counterattacks or a lunge and a few quick strikes will make quick work of them. The custodians move pretty quickly, making them difficult enemies to avoid along the long corridors and small platforms where you'll mostly find them. Especially as a platforming encounter, their speed and movement require you to act quickly against them before they rush and attack you. Like a lot of enemies in this area, the best strategy seems to be striking first. Whether along the platforms or in the corridors, the encounter design of Mother of Mothers pits you against a gauntlet of enemies on a relatively flat plane. These enemies can all cover distance pretty quickly, so these encounters end up being about spacing and trying to fight within the space so as not to draw in more enemies. The long corridors of Mother of Mothers can really compound this challenge and start a chain reaction of pulling enemies if you don't manage that spacing well. Combat is broken up by some of these mild platforming challenges involving censers, where the main danger is falling down into the room below and having to redo it, which they enforce by making a slightly risky jump after getting the treasure. By the way, the blood platforms will appear and disappear in a particular sequence. The level design of Mother of Mothers is sprawling and meandering, but there's ultimately only one path you can take to get to the boss of this area. The basic design of Mother of Mothers are a few large vertical rooms with long corridors connecting them along the bottom and upper portion, and then a series of corridors and rooms that connect these large vertical rooms at the top. The way the large vertical rooms are traversed is through first moving through the bottom and then coming back to the upper corridors to explore the upper portions of those rooms. The very top layer, the route to the boss, is accessed from this far room I'm now in at the very top, which will let me traverse and unlock shortcuts to the rooms below as I make my way across. I think this explanation illustrates how complicated the area can be to navigate. In my first playthrough, Mother of Mothers felt utterly massive, which really worked for me considering how much pathos the space was given in the first half of the game. Now that I'm familiar, my perception of the space has shrunk significantly, but I still harbor affection for the labyrinth that is the design of Mother of Mothers. Redento is at the end of his journey, but there is one more obstacle in his way, the statue of the first pilgrim. This statue was built where the first pilgrim took his last step, and then is said that the miracle carried him to continue his path along the road of the ancient processions. Redento is despairing here because once again he does not know the path forward. It's here where the first pilgrim's path ended, and he was to show the way beyond where the path continues. This whole journey has been in pursuit of the first pilgrim, who long ago left them on his solitary pilgrimage. It is up to us to help Redento once more, and this is done with the very gifts he bestowed upon Penitente. For this final puzzle, I need to equip the 3 prayer beads that he rewarded us with, the stone toes from the statue of the first pilgrim that Redento held on to. If we equip the beads we received from Redento, the statue will move. Heading into this room, we find within the case the nail uprooted from dirt relic. This relic is imbued with the willpower of the first pilgrim on his journey and will allow Penitente to move normally through water. And it is through this item where we learn a bit more about the first pilgrim's story. The nail is the incorrupt remains of the first pilgrim ripped from martyr Nicanor by himself as he was burned alive by the congregation, labeled as a heretic, while his followers watched and afterward left until there was one. The last follower picked up the nail, and that night he went back to the church and hid the nail within the bricks of the church and left. It seems to me that the first pilgrim was Martyr Nicanor, who was accused of heresy and killed by being buried alive. The genuflecting pilgrims continued his pilgrimage, hoping to follow him to the ancient processions beyond the dream. Redento too has been carried away by the miracle to follow the path of the ancient processions alongside his master, or at least that's what I like to think. And now that he's not using his rosary, might as well get a knot from it. In this room is a pretty unique platforming challenge. In the Mother of Mothers, there is also the Mother of Censers, and boy, she's a swingin'. First, I need to dispose of the Percherons while moving carefully through this room. In the Mother of Mothers, there are also blue Percherons who have more health than their red counterparts. Lucky for us, the Mother of Censers does not care what color they are. She will squish them in one hit regardless. Mercifully, Penitente gets a bit more leeway, only taking a chunk of damage. Once I clear the area out around the blood sand platforms, I need to time my ascent correctly and quickly make my way up the platforms into the door before I get royally bonked. A detail that I find really awesome is that the censer is actually based on a real thing. In Galicia, Spain, the Santiago de Compostela Archcathedral Basilica is the home of the Botafumeiro, a 1.6 meter tall, 160 kilogram censer. In the 13th century, a pulley system was installed to make the censer swing over 68 feet high in a 213-foot arc through the Archcathedral. Amazingly, in its 800-year swinging, it has never injured anyone, which cannot be said for this bad boy, which is a bona fide Percheron and Penitente swatter. Once again, some of the most evocative designs in Blasphemous are based on something nearly as outrageous in real life. The timing on this platforming challenge is tight, but damn, I think it's fun and will grab this sword heart every time, which also happens to be one of the best sword hearts. This is the smoking heart of incense, and it enhances the power and duration of prayers, but also increases their cost by 1 fervor bar. This is the sword heart that pairs well with a drop of coagulated ink bead, as they both increase the strength of prayers by 100% separately, and 200% together, which makes the added cost of prayers a very worthwhile trade-off. After the murder corridor and the Mother of Censers, we find ourselves in an intermediary vertical room in location of Socorro and Cleopas. You'd be forgiven for thinking we've been transported to the church in Albero, but this is the original room of this design. And I think this is intentional reuse of this look, not only to save some time, but because we will discover there is a connection between these two churches. Cleopas is an attendant of Socorro, who he refers to as the pious lady of the perpetual agony. Socorro grew up along a route used by the church to take prisoners to be punished and executed at the summit of a nearby hill. Hearing the cries of the prisoners every day, Socorro compassionately devoted her time to praying for the prisoners to be freed from their pain and suffering. One day she asked the pain and suffering to pass from them and onto her. Wounds and cuts began to appear on her body, but she continued to devote her time to praying for them. She kept doing this until her body was completely bloody and wounded, but without killing her, and continues to this day. I think it's brutal and darkly comedic that you can listen to Cleopas gush about Socorro and then murder her right afterward. I won't do it, but I could, and I think that's a little funny. Here is an example of me managing the gauntlet of enemies poorly at the bottom of this room. Not only did I miss with the plunging attack, but I failed to check for other enemies, and I ended up pulling 2 bellboys in addition to the spear of the cathedral. It ends up being a pretty entertaining scramble, especially considering the sole flask I have left to up the stakes, but I could have made it a lot easier on myself by approaching the situation a bit more tactically. But it's all worth it at the end of the day because I got the femur of Carpal, another bone. I make it to the next pre-due by the skin of my teeth, and after grabbing the next mea culpa shrine above, I can move on to the next boss. There is the room to the boss, but continuing up will take me to the shrine. Wait, continue to visit the shrine. Oh geez, well, boss it is. The next boss is perhaps my favorite boss visual design in the game, Melquiades, the exhumed archbishop. His design was inspired by the jeweled saints, the body of martyrs from early Christianity, found in Rome in the 16th century, which were then paraded across Europe and increasingly laden with jewels from different congregations. Their remains were taken to. Like the jeweled saints, Melquiades was exhumed, cleaned, and decorated. The remains were then hoisted into the air by the congregation and swayed to make the remains look as if they were walking again. I love the concept of this fight being the congregation puppeting the archbishop around, and I like how the arms are all these hairy, burly dad arms. The basic design of the fight is to damage the arms, holding him up to the point where they drop him momentarily, at which point you can deal damage by striking his head. The ascending fourth combo finisher for the mea culpa comes in handy here, as the duration of his head being down corresponds with the time it takes to deal a combo of damage and perform the rising slash as Melquiades rises back up, dealing additional damage to him along the way. While trying to knock away the arms, he will do a number of relatively easy to block but high damaging pokes with his staff, as well as generate columns of magic that will box you in. Crowds of arms will also rise up and swing at you, but this attack doesn't pose much of a threat. The trickiest thing about this fight is getting your positioning right. The fervorous blood and lunge attacks are both useful in this fight to strike multiple arms at once, and the fervorous blood can help continue to deal damage to the arms even when Penitente is unable to reach them due to magic being in the way. Devil was super effective at the start of the fight, but I don't find myself in the position very often once the fight gets going to make the fervor cost worth it compared to the fervorous blood, which is still very effective and less of a gamble with my fervor. As you will see near the end of this fight, the last section of health takes forever to get down due to a mix of unlucky RNG with the columns of magic, as well as some suboptimal positioning on my part as I see the end in sight and commit the ultimate sin, greed and recklessness. Where Melquiades is when you get down the final arm, and if there are any columns of magic being summoned relative to Penitente's position, are important to consider so that you don't waste an opportunity to strike, because you can't get to his head during the window in which he is vulnerable. It's painful to see how close I came to getting him down, only to have to go through not one, but 2 rounds eliminating his arms to finally finish him off. Let's all join together and get mad over me not using the fervorous blood to deal him the final blow, all because I wanted to end the fight with a cool slash with mea culpa. And here I concede defeat at finishing him off in a cool way and deal the final blow with his head off of the screen. It hurts. This fight ends up broadly being an example of the psychology certain aesthetic players can have on the player. The silhouette endings of boss fights is a nice artistic touch that adds an extra layer of triumph to the climax of the fight, but it also gets into my head when I'm trying harder to end the fight in a cool way to get a satisfying silhouette. It may say more about me than the game ultimately, but it's interesting how those kind of touches can affect how a player interacts with the game. In my case, it's a tragedy of me making myself look like a fool because I'm trying to look cool. And now I have the second mask, the deformed mask of Orestes. This mask tells us that Orestes ventured into a dream realm seeking answers, but that they ultimately eluded him. However, the mask of Crescente tells us that she believed Orestes to have become infirm in his old age, taken by superstition and fallacies. His Holiness gets another short cutscene where he pretty accurately describes how I feel after having Indian food. With 2 masks obtained, it's time to continue heading upward toward the Cradle of Affliction. I tagged the pre-do of the Cathedral rooftops, the next major chunk of the game, but first I want to take a trip to catch up with Nacimiento. My general rule of keeping at least 5 flasks is no longer in danger of being broken with a few upgrades, and at this point I could use a more robust heal than what the flasks are currently giving me. As previously mentioned, the portrait of Dorian Gray was an inspiration for both Nacimiento here and Desamparados, the guide of the miracle from the Blasphemous comic The Kneeling. After this latest round of flask upgrades, Nacimiento said he was tired, and upon returning, the ancient visage on his chest has now started to emerge. This image was inspired by the 2003 horror comedy Gozu. At the climax of the movie, spoilers for a 20-year-old movie coming up, A woman named Ozaki births her adult male self as he crawls out from her, and the outstretched pose the Ancient One makes as he breaks free of Nacimiento is very similar to the pose male Ozaki makes as he leaves female Ozaki. The through line for these stories is the division of aspects of oneself. In the case of Gozu, the inspiration is from the visuals of the scene, while creative director Enrique Gabeza cited the picture of Dorian Gray as a conceptual inspiration, which deals with the division of youth and purity versus age and corruption. In the case of Dorian Gray, he was a willing participant, intentionally using the portrait to absorb his corruption. Again, spoilers for a 133-year-old story, but in the end, filled with guilt and rage, Dorian tries to destroy the portrait by stabbing it, and is found dead as an old man stabbed in the heart. In contrast, both Nacimiento and Desamparadas have been cursed by the miracle to bear this disparity in their visages. For Desamparadas, she tells us that she's been chosen, her purpose to be a guide and scholar in the ways of the miracle. This is speculation, but it seems to me that her youth has been preserved in the canvas so that she may continue in undeath as a guide for the miracle. She was preserved for that moment to lead our protagonist to mea culpa and give him the title Penitente, as shown in the Blasphemous comic. In the case of Nacimiento, he increasingly bears the visage of the Ancient One on his chest as his face gets younger. Following the logic in the picture of Dorian Gray, impurity is being transmuted onto the Ancient One while Nacimiento remains young. His role in the game is to upgrade Penitente's bioflask using Quicksilver, which as discussed earlier was said to have latent healing powers that could be brought out using the art of alchemy. It seems possible that Nacimiento, who has become more youthful as he has gotten older, could be old enough to have practiced the art of alchemy eons ago. At the very least, we know that he can in fact practice alchemy to revive the latent healing powers of Quicksilver to strengthen the bioflask. From there, I don't think it's too much of a leap to then suggest that he is eons old and that the Ancient One embodies his extended life. And I would further suggest the possibility that Nacimiento was also being kept alive unnaturally in order to do the bidding of the miracle and aid Penitente. We are pushing into the Arch-Cathedral rooftops area now. This area is inspired architecturally by the Giralda, a famous tower of the Cathedral of Seville that blends Gothic and Moorish styles in a unique way, resulting in a memorable style. The design of this area is centered around the rooftops elevator, which is controlled by the three masks, and three main levels of rooms that branch off of the elevator on either side. The rooms to the left of the elevator, where we are right now, are corridor gauntlets similar to Mother of Mothers, but with more spikes. The rooms to the right of the elevator are Anointed Legion mini-boss arena encounters with various rewards behind them, locked behind gates. The gate pulleys are on the level below behind a small platforming challenge. So the approach for the right hand side is to defeat the Anointed Legion mini-boss, navigate the platforming challenge to unlock the gate above, and ascend, which is how I will be tackling it. This is an endgame area and as such features upgrades and additions to existing enemies. We get the Armagura with a winged seraph attached here. The chained seraph is an enemy of its own, and the Armagura provides some more melee power, so it's a bit more dangerous to walk straight up and wail on it. We also get the chained seraphs by themselves. They're not very tanky, but they do deal pretty good damage. Because of their erratic attack pattern, I often take them out from range, but you can also take them out pretty quickly with the mea culpa and kill them before they strike you. There's nothing new about striking an enemy from below to defeat them unscathed, but for whatever reason, the game kitchen set a bunch of them up in this area where it seems like the obvious approach. Maybe they did this because it makes it look like they're doing a little dance. This is the elevator of the three masks, which will take us to the other levels of the rooftops, and once I've collected all three, to Escobar and the Cradle of Affliction. And now we have our first Anointed Legion fight. We've seen high-ranking members like Estrus and Perpetua, but these are the foot soldiers who serve Escobar and defend the Mother of Mothers. They're called the Anointed Legion because of the wraps they wear beneath their armor that are anointed with scented oils blessed by His Holiness. They wield hammers that look similar to the Christian aspergillum, an implement used for sprinkling holy water. Mechanically, they're basically mini estresses attacking with hammer strikes, spins, and lightning. Their hitboxes can be a bit finicky, with the hitbox for the end of their spins lasting a bit longer than it appears from the attack. Appropriate spacing is important to parry and counterattack them, which can be tricky in these small arenas. If you're too close when they attack, the parry won't work and they'll strike penitente. That being said, parrying their strikes and dodging through the other attacks is the way to go against them, and they'll go down without much trouble after landing a handful of counterattacks. For defeating the soldier, I get the Mark of the First Refuge, which I will be able to give to Socorro for her questline. The pious Lady of Perpetual Agony protected this Anointed Legion soldier from pain. Now that he is defeated, we can use this mark to relieve a bit of her pain. This is purely speculative, but I wonder if at some point Socorro bore the pain of more members of the Anointed Legion, helping them to not suffer pain in battle to make them more formidable warriors. If so, that's pretty messed up. Before getting access to the pre-do that will serve me for the first half of this area, they throw in a classic Grievance Ascend style arena fight on a bridge. This fight introduces the Flying Seraphs. They wear the same mortuary masks that the Flying Faces do, and are designed visually and mechanically similar to the false Ghost of Perpetua, and I wonder if they are people who have died and been brought back to life by the miracle as a seraph. Like Perpetua, they attack primarily in a series of swooping charges, so they're a good candidate for Devil of the Lights and air impulse attacks. Now we have a multi-headed flying face that fires 4 orbs of energy in alternating orthogonal and diagonal patterns. This enemy is most commonly used to complicate platforming with their attacks. At the end here, I unlock the gate for the level above. Note that I cannot unlock this gate without the silvered lungs, and that in the room below to the right I needed blood perpetuated in sand and knotted tongues to access the Lady of the Six Sorrows for a health upgrade. Performing that execution does not get old. Inserting the deformed mask of Orestes, I gain access to the next level of the rooftops. Here is the second Legion miniboss fight, and these fights escalate by adding in extra enemies as you ascend. At this point, Penitente's tools for managing groups of enemies is robust, so I'm able to dispatch the Seraph quickly to make the fight a duel. You can see that this time I'm slightly better about backing away after parrying so that I can also parry the next attack, but it's a work in progress. And with that, I've gotten the Mask of the Second Refuge. I make my way through this next platforming room to unlock the path forward, again utilizing all my relics in this room. Note that while I'm using a mixture of relics to get this bone up top, the path forward is actually reachable with no relics. Once again, I find it impressive how they made this game, in this area in particular, navigable without relics, while still providing ample gameplay, challenge, and rewards for having them. I can imagine that it was a challenge to design for both scenarios in a way that would make the gameplay and progression satisfying regardless. And this abundance of traversal challenges involving relics is a big sign to the player to consider backtracking to previous areas to find any relics that they may have missed, but it's never required. The optional nature of Blasphemous 1's relics makes for a somewhat novel level and world design when compared to other games placed under the Metroidvania umbrella. With your standard contemporary Metroidvania, the level design will be layered with tributaries and secrets hidden behind Metroidvania abilities. Pulling out to the greater world design, often there will be a cluster of areas that you can explore, with progress in the new areas eventually gated by a required ability, which will then become a standard aspect of the basic design of all subsequent areas. This allows designers to fold these abilities into the basic progression of the areas, a design approach that naturally adds complications as the player progresses and ensures players will not miss an ability along the way. This helps encourage players to backtrack and explore what they missed or couldn't reach before. However, there's also something interesting about how Blasphemous keeps progression separate from these abilities. In my first playthrough of the game, I never got the 3 gnarled tongues. The Egg of Deformity questline is probably the most involved relic questline, and I just never managed to complete it. After beating the game and hopping back into the world to find the secrets I'd missed, I was blown away by how much the game was willing to let me miss by making the relic optional, and how flexible that made the world design and experience. I see it as a really confident and bold move to willingly let players miss content you worked so hard on. Bloodborne, my favorite game of all time, is also another game with a surprising portion of optional content. And I know your mileage may vary depending on what roles games fill in your life, but games with a condensed critical path and a lot of optional content is a design approach that draws me back to a game. Knowing that I can play the game over the course of a weekend or over a course of a couple weeks depending on what I'm in the mood for, really empowers me to tailor my own experience in a way that I find very valuable and considerate of my time. After using the embossed mask of Quirce to get up to the next level, I am fighting the final Anointed Legion soldier, which is predictably further complicated with 2 winged seraph companions at the start of the fight. Devla is a quick fix for them, and at the end of the fight it appears like I've almost gotten the hang of the tempo and spacing of the fight, and can parry and counterattack my way to victory. Coming out ahead, I acquire the 3rd and final mark of the refuge. In addition, I'm rewarded for ascending these 3 levels with a mea culpa shrine, which I believed to be level 6 at the time, still not realizing I'd missed the shrine just before Melquiades. So I unintentionally made this whole section just a bit tougher for myself. I upgrade the Fervorous Blood, turning it into a gory boomerang that will strike any enemies that remain in its path again. With all 3 marks of the refuge, it's time to speak with the Lady of Perpetual Agony. But not before making a quick stop in Albero to speak with some old friends of Cleopas. Cleopas was once a member of the Order of the True Burial with Ludovico, until one day he broke his vows and skipped town upon hearing about the miracle of the Lady of Perpetual Agony. Ludovico gives you a medallion featuring the symbol of the Order of the True Burial to give to Cleopas, hoping that it might serve as a reminder of his time with the Order. With this memento in hand, it's time to visit Socorro's chapel in the Mother of Mothers. The 3 marks I have were signs of protection for the bearer that the Anointed Legion soldiers had, indicating that Socorro bore their pain instead. The crimson wraps that support her represent the link between her wards and herself. Each mark returned to lessen Socorro's pain. Cleopas states that those who bore the mark clamored for her refuge and protection. I think that killing them ended the pain of theirs that Socorro would have to bear, but also that from the other side of the dream, Socorro's wards could will their lady to be freed from the miracle she endured. After returning all of the marks, we see Socorro finally at peace before vanishing, making her way to the other side of the dream for a much-deserved rest. While Cleopas seems happy for his lady's rest, he'd also dedicated his life to her, and now she is gone. This gives Cleopas an existential crisis, and after ending the conversation with him here, he moves to the Cathedral rooftops, where we will meet with him shortly. Before speaking with Cleopas, though, I'm going to explore the left half of the rooftops, and tag the preview for the final area of the base game. I start by exploring the interstitial level, which I accessed by lowering the elevator when I went to speak with Socorro and Cleopas, allowing me to use the Golden Threads relic to fall down to the ledge below. The Gnarled Tongues relic allows me to traverse this room, ignoring the Anointed Legionnaire, who is a pain in the ass to fight in a room with drops on either side of the arena. This, however, also applies to him, and I help him on his way to the other side of the dream as I make my way out of the room. I cut my first run through this area for time, during which I picked up the Canta Yondo of the 3 Sisters from the chest. This prayer represents the inhuman groan of agony from the Tres Angustias in Yondo. I'm not sure why it's here, beyond being relatively powerful. This prayer will damage all enemies on screen. The prayer is a little inconsistent in its damage, so I don't use it often, but it can be a powerful tool in many arenas. This vertical room I'm in serves as a connection between the levels beside the elevator, unlocked by moving down through the tower. In practice, this doesn't really get used when you'll almost certainly be able to fast travel between previews at this point, but I guess it's satisfying to have the area tie back together. This is the final room to get through in the rooftops, and it's mostly a platforming challenge. Not a particularly strong one either, but rushing straight through it stands a non-trivial chance of dying. The result is a bit of a ho-hum procession that is too much friction and tedium in a connective room, especially when you don't pay attention to your health and have to trek back to this. I'm not mad. Now this is a beautiful shot and perhaps the most gorgeously rendered vista in the game. Not only is it looking back upon the world you have traveled through to get to this point, but it is doing so through this incredibly striking dusk color palette that recalls one of the thematic through lines of the game, the endless dusk of Custodia. This is emphasized by this corpse, which reflects upon the Fairest Tree as a symbol of Escobar's final communion with the miracle before he became a tree and burned. The corpse ends their thought saying, "Facing this eternal dusk, I will wait until I depart toward the other side of the dream." In an interview I conducted with the creative director Enrique Cabeza, I asked about time in Custodia, to which he responded, "I like the idea that these cursed places stay somehow frozen in time, hence the idea that the events of Blasphemous unfold during an eternal sunset, which is on the one hand beautiful as well as melancholic, but on the other hand, still a curse." This eternal dusk is also mentioned by Tirso at the beginning of the game, and the mountains of the Endless Dusk area title reinforce this concept. And if you recall, the dreamscapes of the Guardian Visages consist of an ocean frozen in time and iron, bathed in an eternal dusk. Iron and dusk are brought together once again in this scene, as the Fairest Tree bathed in dusk light depicts Escobar's final act before his martyrdom at the hand of the miracle, the final act that cursed Custodia to this eternal sunset. So why is Custodia frozen in time, and what does this theme mean? Custodia is frozen in time in an eternal sunset because this land has stagnated. Since His Holiness Escobar turned the throne and transformed into a great dead tree and burned, the grievous miracle has run amok and Custodia has been without a leader. The Age of Corruption, as this era of Custodia is called on the Kickstarter, is suspended at the dusk of this age, unable to recover from its decline and unable to progress while Escobar, the last son of the miracle, presides. We see a similar motif in the Dark Souls games, in which the declining kingdoms are depicted as unstuck in time between fire and dark, unable to progress into the next age until the chosen undead overcomes the power structure of the current age and leads the world into the next. In both scenarios, we see the power structure stagnate the world, as their ambitions to maintain their power disrupt the natural progression. In the case of Blasphemous, we see the orthodoxy of Custodia's religion become increasingly radical, to the point where no level of devotion is good enough, the guilt and sin of Custodia consuming the land. And Escobar is actively clinging to power in this eternal dusk, which we'll discuss more later. We just saw Penitente fight two wardens in silhouette. It's a cool moment mechanically and visually, but also a reminder that a warden of the church stood guard over the Brotherhood of the Silent Sorrow, the covenant accused of heresy by the church. The Anointed Legion, soldiers blessed by Escobar himself, carried out the massacre. Having overcome the wardens, I arrive at the Wall of Prohibitions proper. But before getting into this area, I want to tie up loose ends with Cleopas. Since his Lady of Perpetual Agony crossed over to the other side of the dream, Cleopas made his way up to the Arch-Cathedral rooftops where he's having an existential crisis. He saw the Lady as mercy and holiness incarnate, and is having a crisis of faith in how he can go on after worshipping holiness itself. The Court of the True Burying, a reminder of his past with the Order, helps him to realize that he can carry on and honor the Lady by showing mercy to others by rejoining the Order. After the conversation on the rooftops, the end of Cleopas' storyline is at the Order in Albero. Cleopas has renewed purpose at the Order and thanks us for our help by rewarding us with tiento to your thorned hairs. This is a prayer sung about Tentudia, the nun killed by her convent in fear of the Inquisition because of her thorned hair, who we helped grant true burial to. This prayer summons the thorned Dame Tentudia, who protects us from damage for a short period of time. It's one of the most powerful prayers in the game, and you'll certainly see me employ this prayer against endgame bosses. Now let's explore the Wall of the Holy Prohibitions. This is where the Church Inquisitors locked up all the heretics and blasphemers. This area saw a big visual glow up with the Stir of Dawn DLC and now is one of the more unique interiors in the game. structure of this area consists primarily of 4 large rooms filled with rows of cells stacked 2 by 2, with the central stair as the vertical circulation. The complication of this otherwise relatively simple layout is that different keys are needed for the cell doors, and progressing through the area will require us to find the key of the secular and the key of the scribes. I also brought with me the key of the Inquisitor that I bought from Candelaria, which isn't needed but will help open up a few more doors as I make my way through the prison. This area is the most claustrophobic in the game, a feature further emphasized by coming after Mother of Mothers and the Arch-Cathedral rooftops, the largest and most spacious areas in the game. This sense of claustrophobia is mechanically supported by the encounter design of the lunatics, these bound prisoner enemies that charge at you and harass you every time you enter the room and while you move through the level. Eventually the novelty wears off a bit and I proceed to take them out regularly or just ignore them, but the execution move is pretty fun. Here I get the first key, the key of the secular, as I'm trapped and swarmed by lunatics and flagellants. This floor-breaking trap sets a good precedent in this area as being tricky and springing enemy encounters on you. This works well with the relatively easy enemies and late-game stats, making these fair encounters that keep you on your toes. With the key of the secular in hand, we can go around and see which doors will now open. First, I want to get the item I missed when the floor broke on me. This is one of the backer collectibles, the Ulna of Coke the Troubadour. This unfortunate musician wrote a satirical song about the Inquisitors and was executed for it, and all music banned. Which is kind of funny because I think their prayers are sung, but I'm sure that would be an exception. I continue to explore the room and I find this process of exploration through this area to be pretty satisfying. The area feels like a big puzzle box and I enjoy slowly unlocking it all. It's also a good bit of design that you can see your progress by open cell doors, and that as more of them are open, the more likely a lunatic is to pop out and attack you. So this sort of scales the tension with the progression of this area, which I think is cool. This door, unlocked by the Inquisitor's key, nets us another bio flask. The complaint from this corpse about the elevator being noisy is actually a hint for a kind of opaque puzzle. What you need to do is keep sending the elevator up and down, and if you're paying attention, you'll see and hear the gate in the top right corner open up. It's a bit tedious, but it doesn't really take too long. Getting this gate open rewards us with Quirce's Scorched Bead. Quirce will be the boss of the area, and for those reading descriptions, this gives some pathos and starts to build him up. This is done a lot in Souls games as well, and I really enjoy the process of learning the history of a boss, usually a tragic and horrifying story, and then finally meeting them in their ultimate diminished or corrupted form. While these post-its on the back of items are only for the benefit of the player as a breadcrumb trail towards better understanding the lore and story, I also like to imagine that in moments like this, Penitente has heard the legend of Quirce, and seeing the scorched bead jogs his memory of it. The bead tells the story of Quirce, who was burned at the stake by Inquisitors. However, the miracle intervened and these flames burnt him to ash, only to have him brought back time after time. Pretty brutal. And there's more to his story, but we'll discuss it as it's presented to maintain how our understanding of him is meant to unfold dramatically. The function of this bead is to greatly reduce fire damage, it being the ultimate form of this kind of elemental protection, which will come in very valuable for a few upcoming boss encounters. Situated more or less as the final area of the base game, it's interesting that, with the exception of a few small rooms, traversal challenges and relics aren't much of a factor at all in the wall. In more traditional Metroidvanias, endgame areas often become a final test, bringing all of these Metroidvania abilities together. But with Blasphemous 1 standing adjacent to the genre and making relics optional, the focus seems to be more on navigating the specific intricacies of the area as contained within itself, and I'd argue that the result is an area with more identity than it might otherwise have. I appreciate that it eschews ramping up complexity and responding to the accumulated progression of the game in favor of being a novel play experience with the variety of the areas in the game. Making our way into the lower right cell block, the area continues to catch us off guard. The backgrounds of this area change with the stir of dawn, and it makes this place much more visually distinct. I like how art adorning the walls also serves to further reinforce and build up the upcoming fight with Quirce, depicting him being burned at the stake by the Inquisitors. In here we get the key of the scribe, unlocking the remainder of the area. Now we are going to explore and unlock the pair of vertically stacked cell blocks to the left of this central circulation room. At this point in the endgame, no basic enemies are really much of a challenge, and this once fearsome foe as a regular enemy illustrates Penitente's progression. Here is one of the limited number of rooms that requires relics to traverse, and it nets us another bone collectible. This is of Ashgan the Inquisitor, who sought answers by torturing priests. In the end, he deeply regretted his actions. This door leads out to a route that was added with the Stir of Dawn DLC, connecting it to the patio of the Silent Steps. The shortcut will come in handy shortly, even though I'm not entirely sure having an escape route out of a prison makes a whole lot of sense. There is something so satisfying about blitzing them and getting that multi-strike. That's the stuff. This will mark the final fervor upgrade in the game. Now let's head into the final cell block located in the top left of the area. I'm a simple man, I know, but that never gets old. Here's the penultimate trap as we head towards Quirce, with this lion head riding down on the elevator. It's not much of a challenge, but these small set pieces and tricks are what garner much of my affection for this area. However, I do think that making this space a bit tighter could have resulted in a more tense experience. We will see this exact encounter in a different context later, and the smallness of the arena does make the challenge and precision of spacing a bit more complicated and satisfying to manage. This room tucked away here nets me another collectible, which are growing a bit stale at this point honestly, especially given that I've already collected enough bones to unlock the boss beyond. These collectibles just aren't that interesting to find anymore. They're being used to pad out the area as other rewards start to fade as the base game is wrapping up, but it still doesn't make them interesting to find. Heading to the left at this point will take us to Senor Quirce, but before that I'd like to unlock a little shortcut before facing him just in case the battle doesn't go my way. Note that I edited out the process of unlocking this gate, but it was just another couple of rooms of exploring the wall, and while I enjoy the area, I have said all I need to say about it at this point. Shortcut unlocked, I'll take a well-earned rest before wrapping things up. Now let's head left and take a gander. We have a moment here, so let me know in the comments what is your favorite area in Blasphemous. I really enjoyed the spectacle of the Quirce encounter at the start and finish of the fight. Thematic with the area the fight begins as a trap, the floor crumbling beneath you as Quirce's flaming sword pierces it. As mentioned, Quirce is a penitent who was burned at the stake by Inquisitors, but the miracle intervened, making him continually burn to ash in return. A corpse in a cell states about him that he walks with fire and fire with him. This is confirmed in the art book to be a Twin Peaks reference, which I appreciate as a big Twin Peaks fan. I really enjoyed this fight. It's not really that difficult ultimately, but it's fun learning the fight. Quirce has a few distinct attacks. The first is where he clings to the ceiling and throws his sword. I find that Debla works really well here, and you can abuse the prayer's iframes to keep from taking any damage even if the sword passes by you. The most potentially problematic attack is the dive kick that erupts in a column of flames, as it's possible to get stun-locked if hit and struck by it numerous times, especially later in the fight when there are more columns of flame. This attack is preceded by him chucking his sword across the arena, which can be hard to avoid if you're not expecting it. Next are quick charges, often accompanied by columns of flame, and I just love the animation timing on this because it just feels weird and unnatural. The best way to handle this is to jump over him and then situate yourself where he will ultimately end up, giving you a huge attack window to punish. I found that with the wind-up of his charge that you can do a lunge attack and move through his hitbox, giving you a pretty safe way to deal damage and avoid the attack. That's really all there is to the fight. It comes to maintaining your ability to read and react appropriately as you whittle down his relatively large health bar. I'm not normally as much in favor of longer fights in these kinds of games, as sustained perfect play ends up feeling kinda tedious for me, but Quirce strikes the right balance for me between complexity and how punishing the attacks are, that I find it maybe a touch too long, but fun to play and is a fight I always look forward to. A cool touch I noticed is that it seems like Quirce is programmed to perform the attack where he throws his sword against the left wall near the end of the fight, so that when you finish him off, the wall with the sword in it will sensibly erupt as you defeat him. A pretty satisfying finish to a pretty great fight. After the fight, we meet up with our boy Deo Veracius, who tells us a bit more about Quirce. It turns out that he was unjustly condemned with heresy by the Inquisitors. That was the basis upon which the miracle interceded, returning Quirce to life by flames that consumed him. This reads to me as a conquest over his punishment at the hand of the Inquisition, and given that he wields a sword, I do wonder if he didn't enact justice upon those who unjustly condemned him. And with that, we've climbed the Wall of Holy Prohibitions, and it's time to go get the last mask for the elevator in the Arch Cathedral. To do that, we need to grab the item Quirce tried to deny from Penitente, the Key of the High Peaks. From the location where we just unlocked the shortcut we had left, which brings us to a fancy looking lift called the Horse of the Summits. The design of this lift is based upon paintings of the Greek myth, the fall of Phaeton, son of Helios. As the myth goes, Phaeton's friends didn't believe that he was really the son of Helios, so in anger, Phaeton took his father's sun wagon, proceeding to recklessly ride it across the sky. This is often depicted as a chariot pulled by 4 horses stumbling along. In the game, this highly secret lift was created by the Archdeacon Dolphos, who in his search for spiritual and physical purity secluded himself from the world to pursue his obsession in the high peaks. Dolphos believed that grace could be found in purity in what can be seen and touched. In this pursuit, Dolphos determined the shine and reflection of silver was the key to purity, and that it must not adorn one's body on the outside, but that it must line one's insides. And so Dolphos had all the silver he could find melted down so that he could use it to line his eyes, stomach, and lungs. This presumably killed Dolphos the Archdeacon, but also may have worked to some degree, and his silvered lungs have been aiding us against toxic miasma for quite some time now. Thanks, Dolphos. As we leave with the final mask, we get a short scene of Escobar, who has now been awakened from the cradle affliction by the miracle. In addition to the final mask, this is also where we get the final health upgrade. This begins the wrapping up of loose ends portion of this playthrough and one of my favorite parts in a Metroidvania or Metroidvania adjacent game. A lot of genres have this final call before the end game, but with the non-linear and layered progression of Metroidvanias, I find this portion to be especially satisfying, to demonstrate a mastery over the world as you move freely and pick up the loose ends. The first loose end is wrapping up Tirso's quest now that we've delivered all the herbs and defeated Quirce, saving all the kissers of wounds. This is a really positive ending, especially for Blasphemous, in which the kissers reaffirm their dedication to the sick and unhealthy of Custodia. Of course, this quest is also easy to mess up, and Tirso has less positive words if you're unable to save any kissers, leaving Custodia disillusioned. Thankfully, regardless of how successful you are, Tirso will gift you a rosary knot upon the conclusion of his quest line. To max out the number of rosary beads we can equip, we pop over to the Holy Line where we can now grab a few previously inaccessible treasures. I could have gotten this earlier and made things a bit easier for myself. Part of the fun of this run for me was crafting a route that was not only complete to discuss the game, but efficient. Which is how route crafting and having multiple ways to get through a game is so valuable for replayability for me. It's valid to criticize Blasphemous 1 for not having incredibly robust combat options ultimately, something the sequel addresses. However, I personally do not tend going for a variety of builds when it comes to replayability, as much as I'm interested in how it feels to go through areas and fight bosses earlier and later in a playthrough. So what Blasphemous done really works for me, and the act of crafting the route for this analysis really highlighted for me how much freedom was in the world design. So this ends our not upgrades in Soledad's questline, in which she tells us her task has been made complete and her sins unforgivable. I'm of the opinion that the miracle intentionally held Soledad here in order to aid Penitente in his pilgrimage. So while she may not be Ingracia, who became the sole creator of rosaries in Custodia, I like to think that Soledad was ultimately granted peace on the other side of the dream for her role in aiding Penitente, and the sequel might just weigh in on this. After this, we return to our favorite Sistern, where a very special treat from the Strife and Ruin DLC awaits us. Using nail uprooted from dirt to get up, behind this hidden opening is one hell of an anachronistic surprise. Here, Penitente can try his luck at Blasphemous Alcazar of Grief, an Easter egg that pays homage to the NES titles like Foe Xanadu that served as inspiration. It costs 2,500 tears per try and each run starts you fresh. The reward for beating this minigame is a unique skin for Penitente, which is done by beating the final boss and collecting all 5 skulls hidden throughout the level. This version of Penitente is limited to moving, jumping, and doing a basic swing of his sword. Like the Bleeding Heart New Game Plus penitence, his health is replaced by 3 orbs, with getting hit taking away an orb which can be replenished by fighting chicken legs in the level. I think it's really cute with its 8-bit visuals and chiptune track. I especially like seeing Penitente and enemies interpreted into this 8-bit style, bridging the gap with the games of my childhood that developed my taste into that which I would enjoy the hell out of Blasphemous many years later. I'm not going to spend too much time on Alcazar of Grief, but I'll show highlights from the roughly 10 minutes of gameplay that it takes for me to get through the minigame and collect all the rewards. Exploring the areas of the minigame to find all 5 golden skulls is pretty fun, only frustrated slightly by the game gating the previous areas as you proceed, meaning that you're going to need to ace it and find them all as you go. But given that it takes about 10 minutes to get through the Alcazar of Grief, it's not a major issue. One devious little secret is this illusory wall that you can simply walk through to get into a secret room. In this room you get a special skin called the Adventure Skin that matches the monochromatic Game Boy-esque palette of the room. I really like these kind of secrets, and this minigame helped illustrate to me how good exploration is so foundational to my personal enjoyment of games. Even with its simplified and pared down mechanics, this design manages to be more than a cool artistic mix-up and set a fun little game because it gives a good sense of place through meaningful exploration. Secret rooms and hidden skulls encourage the player to be keenly aware of their surrounding and how they can interact with it, something that was just as valuable to games then as it is now. And I think sense of exploration and the creation of space is such an important universal through line because it's something artistically unique to the medium of games. Your participation with the space is active, and finding secrets actively engages the player with a space. This is really the core of Metroidvanias, which make it their business to lead players back through spaces and recontextualize them by providing new ways to interact using abilities in a manner that is directed by the player. The takeaway is simply that this minigame helped elucidate for me how exploration is the timeless throughline at the core of Blasphemous. Alcazar of Grief ends with a boss battle against an 8-bit version of the Guarda Infante. It's a simple but cute fight against the monster that is only slightly complicated by Penitente's limited moveset, but I think it's a fitting boss. Not only is it fun to see a larger and more complicated enemy in this 8-bit style, but given how the exploration is king in this minigame, making the boss something of a victory lap feels appropriate. I also think that the animation of the child crying after being beaten is a cute alternative to Guarda Infante's death animation in the regular game. Now that the boss is defeated, we come to this treasure room, where presenting all 5 golden skulls grants us access to the final treasure, a new skin called Archaic Exaltation that matches the coloring of Penitente in the Alcazar of Grief. With that retro diversion done, it's time to explore the final mysteries of the Sistern. In this puzzle room, we find ourselves with 2 blank-looking mosaics and a couple of corpses beneath them. There isn't much of a hint given, but the corpses are enough to encourage a stumped player to peek into their thoughts. The puzzle actually requires you to speak with the corpse to activate it, otherwise the changes to the mosaics will not occur, which feels a little arbitrary to me, but it does lower the chances of a player solving the puzzle accidentally, though it can still happen after getting the corpse's ambiguous hint. What the ghosts are hinting at here is that numbers will appear on the mosaics, and that the number on the right will need to be half the number on the left. So we manipulate the mosaics by leaving the room and returning in order to make the value on the left twice that of the value on the right, solving the puzzle when the left reads 4 and the right side reads as 2. As far as I can tell, there isn't anything thematically relevant about this puzzle, but there doesn't have to be. These little riddle rooms are a nice minor way to break up the exploration and combat, and while this room doesn't knock my socks off, it's perfectly fine and the reward is good. And that is the Silver Grape, a prayer bead that enhances defenses considerably according to its description, providing the highest physical damage resistance in the game, making it a very useful bead that will stay on Penitente more often than not for the rest of the playthrough. The lore of this item talks about the number 1 silver fanatic in Custodia, Archdeacon Dolphos, and his obsession with adorning his insides with silver. Given the context, I would venture a guess that this grape was made for Dolphos to consume, but for whatever reason was never eaten. Or maybe it was, but found its way back out. With that puzzle solved, we make our way towards the big kahuna of puzzles down in the Sistern, the Chalice of Inverted Verses. In this room, we see mosaics of 3 enemies, the Sleepless Tomb, the Phalaris Bull, and the Lionheart. Similar to the Delicate Flower quest in Hollow Knight, the Chalice of Inverted Verses will require Penitente to go from one location to another without resting or using fast travel gates, in this case without dying. Doing any of those will spill the chalice and restart the challenge. This is a routing challenge, and I love it. First, we need to make a route to kill each of the 3 enemies shown to fill the chalice, and then get back to this room and do it all in the safest and most efficient way possible. I start my route at the Wall of Holy Prohibitions to get the blood of the Lionheart. Not only is this the furthest point from the chalice room, but it's the highest, and it's much easier to quickly traverse down the map than up. I'll be showing this challenge in its entirety as I think it's a really fun challenge, one that presents the strength of Blasphemous' world design. Honestly, a really bad display of combat prowess here to my shame, but with our first enemy down, it's time to head toward the Library of Negated Words. This route actually became a fair bit easier after the Stir of Dawn. It added this critical shortcut in the wall, and as we will see, geometry and sleeping canvases. The Chalice challenge is fun to solve for its route, and having a relic like the Linen of Golden Thread and how it makes you rethink how you navigate the world is no small part of that. I take a relatively straightforward route where I use the ability to fall through screens pretty basically, and mostly to save time and avoid fights, but the routes made possible by using this relic are many. This challenge is also a good use case for the insta-kill spikes and pits, because I think without them the threat really isn't there. In Hollow Knight you can't get hit at all during the Delicate Flower quest, a design Blasphemous could have implemented as well, but having you fight enemies and collect their blood clashes with that design choice, and I could see causing too much friction. As it stands, I think not only do the spikes and pits provide a fair obstacle to navigate, but because of that, it's another challenge to consider when planning your route. Back when I unlocked the shortcut, I mentioned that I would have a use later, and this is it. I'm heading through the library to reach the sleeping canvases to collect the blood of the Sleepless Tomb. The dense encounter design of the library may be a bit of a pain in the ass to explore, but I find it pretty fun to speedrun through, dodging books and inky lasers as I quickly drop through the area to reach the sleeping canvases. The Sleepless Tomb is no pushover and can hit pretty hard, so we'll be playing a bit more defensively and making sure I manage the golden golems in order to keep myself out of trouble. With my second enemy down, it's time to go after the Phalaris Bowl. This is where the geometry changes from the Stir of Dawn DLC make the biggest difference to this run. The shortcut I'm taking didn't exist, meaning that you'd either have to brave the swinging axes and spikes in the room below, or do a lot of backtracking to continue to fill the chalice, which was too much. No thank you. My route has me take a shortcut through Mercy Dreams. From here you could either make your way through the Sistern to get to a Phalaris Bowl, or you could cut up through the wasteland of buried churches and then pop down to the Phalaris Bowl with the mountains of endless dusk through Albero. I choose the latter mostly because I think it's a safer run that's easier to navigate. It's worth noting that there are other combinations of this route that could be taken by dropping into any of the pits along the way through the wasteland, as they will drop Penitente into the Sistern. Of course, I can't pass up the opportunity to pet the dog, who appears outside the church only 10% of the time. While I know some people are a bit cynical about the petting the dog cat trend in games, I personally don't mind. And I think a game like Blasphemous, that moments of levity are a nice way to provide variety and contrast to the generally dark tones of the game, which fits well here in Albero, which in of itself serves as the remnant of civilization and hope in Custodia. In addition, the dog called Nemo in the files is modeled after the late pet of one of the devs as a small tribute to their departed companion. Petting Nemo also serves a mechanical function, healing you for a small amount, which is a nice touch. Arriving in the mountains of the endless dusk, it's time to finish filling the chalice. This is by far the easiest of the enemies to beat, which is good to save for last. It's stupid, but I always trigger this guy to throw a spear and see if I can outrun it back into the cistern, but I didn't make it this time. At this point, I just have to not screw up, and I'm all set. Using the linen of golden thread, I take a leap of faith to the platform below, snagging myself a chair while I'm on my way. And there we have it, the Chalice of Inverted Verse is complete. The reward is appropriate for the effort put into it. The final virtue of the mea culpa ascended, or at least that's what I thought. Remember when I forgot to explore that room right before Melquiades and the Mother of Mothers? This is when I realize I've missed it. It's not a big deal though, and I take this visit to continue to fill out the skill tree and strengthen Penitente as I head into the toughest boss of the game. I quickly open this shortcut into Echoes of Salt before returning to Mother of Mothers to get the Mea Culpa fully powered up. There we go.